Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the LGS Pod, the Soccer Shorts companion podcast where we shine a spotlight on stories about local soccer culture here in our hometown of San Diego, as well as across the U.S. and around the world. I'm John Cross, the founder of Soccer Shorts, and with me tonight, as always, is our co-host Dylan Wilson. Dylan, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing well, staying cool in the warm, humid summer that we are having that is apparently set to continue. But yeah, how about yourself?
Yeah, did you get any rain today?
I did not actually, no.
We got about an hour's worth of rain
Oh, wow.
here in Escondido. Not hard. I mean, drops were spaced out enough that you could run between them, kind of thing. But big drops, summer rain kind of thing.
Sure.
But yeah, as you mentioned about staying cool, one of my my week was a little hectic and a little busy. I am not as well prepared for this week's episode as I normally am. We'll talk about a couple of things here in a second. Had a bunch of doctor appointments, but in terms of the heat, our AC went out on Saturday.
Oh, yikes.
And we were fortunate enough to be able to, after I didn't do it, my wife did it, but after calling about to the 8th place, we found someone to get over here, and we were able to fix it within 2 hours, which was wonderful because I don't know how I would do because our thermometer was reading 102 right before we started the show here. And I just, in my post-COVID time, I grew up in Palm Springs, and I, especially if it's a drier heat, don't have a problem with the heat, never have my entire life. But since I've had this long COVID that I've been dealing with, the heat really gets to me. It drains me, and especially if there's humidity.
Yeah.
So with the heat, with the AC going out, with my whole bunch of doctor's appointments kind of came through this week, I did not have, and a 3-day weekend. So had some other things going on planned for the 3-day weekend. Just didn't get the prep done that I normally do throughout the week. Although one of the things I did do that in our banter thing here, we'll share is my wife and I were looking for something to watch, and on Netflix, which I know you don't have, we found one of these competition shows where they take, in this case, retired athletes, and then, who's kind of the best all-around athlete of these retired athletes, give them a chance to compete again. And it's a Japanese program, so I thought, great. Kind of start getting my mind in around Japanese culture. So we were watching it, and one of the athletes competed in this sport called kabaddi. Have you ever heard of kabaddi? Because I hadn't. This was my introduction to kabaddi.
No, not familiar.
Yeah. I have to tell you, I have never been so enamored with a new to me sport as I have with kabaddi since I discovered curling, whatever Olympics, maybe the Vancouver Olympics. And, much to my family's, I'll say chagrin, but probably a little harsher than that, my love for curling every Winter Olympics drives them crazy. For something I pay no attention to at any other time of the year till the Olympics. But I have this weird fascination towards curling, and draws me in. And this sport, kabaddi, it's really hard to describe. I'm going to spell it for anyone who's listening. It's K-A-B, B as in boy, A-D-D-I. So kabaddi, and it's kind of like a tag game. It's 7v7. You play on this indoor court. Well, I guess there's an outdoor version and an indoor version. But you send what's called a raider in to try to tag people on the other side. And what you want to do is try to tag them and get back over to your half. It's like a recess game, from like a made-up game from recess that you would do as a kid. But you go to the other side, try to tag someone, and then they try to tackle you before you can get back. And there's this crazy strategy. And it's really hard to describe other than that unless you hop on and go to YouTube. But there's a professional league in India. I went down this huge rabbit hole, which of course took away time from planning for this episode as well. But I'd never heard of the sport. There was a competitor on this, reality competition show. And I started going into it and just spending more time looking at Kabaddi, and it has drawn me in. That now, once you start searching for things and stuff, now I start getting alerts for stuff. So
Yeah.
that's
Hmm.
that's part of things. If you get a chance to check it out, it's interesting. And as a former, one of the many things I taught was PE, but when I used to do a team sports class, we occasionally did some of the main team sports in the US, but really I always tried to find things like this, things that were different to bring in a new culture, something the kids didn't have a lot of prior experience in. So it created a bit of a more level playing field for people to kind of have to think about the strategy and what to do. So it's probably that part of my brain a little bit, the former teacher in me being interested and seeing something like this and how I could have used it with my teaching. But
Fair
yeah,
enough.
that was a bit of my time this last week was going down the Kabaddi rabbit hole.
Fair enough. That's always fun, discovering a new game.
Yeah. How about you for just soccer related stuff? Anything new this week?
Not really. I know, it's the international break, which I'm never a huge fan
Yeah,
of.
I mentioned that last week.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It used to be stupid when it was just friendlies, and now they're like glorified friendlies, and it's just like I don't even know that that's better. But anyway, it just feels very early coming like 3 weeks into the Premier League season, 2 weeks into some other seasons. Like I think Serie A is like 1 week into their season, and we're on an international break. It just seems silly to me. But yeah, I didn't make it out to fair play for the Spurs match, but thankfully it was awful, so that wasn't a bad thing. Yeah, nothing really. I haven't been back to the Wave in a while. I don't think they had a home game this weekend though. So
Yeah, I'm so out of it. I did see that SDFC had a match. They won. But I've been completely out of it with most of the stuff. I know Bradford City, which I've been following, got a victory on Saturday, but I know they had a match today. I haven't even had a chance to even look at the results to see how they did. It's just been kind of how crazy my
oh,
day and week has been.
that was in the EFL Trophy for what it's worth, which is
Yeah, it
like
was in the FL Trophy.
that's what just leagues 1 and 2, right?
No, I think that's I think that's everybody because I thought Grimsby Town beat Manchester United last week.
Well, that was in the EFL Cup. This is the
Oh, that's
EFL
right. Yeah,
Trophy.
the
These are
trophy. That's right.
different things. Well, because the Premier League academies are in it. Like,
Yeah.
I know Tottenham Academy's in this. So yeah, I mean, well, they won. Yeah, they beat Grimsby for what it's worth. So
Yeah. All right. Well, good start to the season, but I didn't get to enjoy any of that even in highlights today. So, with my lack of preparation, I mean, normally we kind of talk about some current events, possibly some Pro-Rel news, some lower league news, San Diego news. I think we're going to skip all that this week and just jump straight to our main topic, which is part 3 of our Pro-Rel series, where we're going to take a look at Japan and look at a country. So our first 2 were about England, and we looked at historically, right, the original soccer pyramid and the full structure and what's been developed over 140 years. Japan's a super interesting case, and we'll get into all the details in a second, but it is a country that has a lot of similarities in their soccer development during the 20th century. So there's a lot of parallels we can see. And in the 90s, they both started new professional leagues. But how they started those leagues and the direction they took over the next 35 years-ish has been vastly different. And we're going to take the rest of our time on this podcast to look at the Japan football structure on both the men's and the women's side. But we'll focus mostly initially on the men's side because the women's side has been much later in developing. So we'll get that in the second part. But look at how a country, and I'll say an organized FA with good leadership and a strong vision, 100-year out vision, were able to take a country that had no professional men's teams in 1990 and 35 years later have a full pyramid that goes down 7+ tiers in some areas, tied together with promotion, relegation, you know, all that in 35 years. So to all those people out there in the US who say Pro-Rel will never work, or it could never happen, or it would take too long for any of this to happen, keep that in mind. Japan, the JFA, went from no professional teams in 1990 to 2025 of a full pyramid. So it can be done if there is the right leadership and the right dedication. All right. Before we start and look specifically at what the current state is, Dylan, do you have any questions or comments before we jump into this?
Yeah, I do. I have I actually just recently watched a video that was released by one of my soccer YouTube channels about the history. It was just kind of about like the fans in the J League. Oh yeah, 442 last week did a channel. They kind of focus heavily on the Urawa Red Diamonds and their fans kind of making themselves known at the Club World Cup this past summer. It's not a terribly informational video, but it's neat. I'll send you the link.
Is that the Inside Japan's Football Obsession?
That is the one.
Is that
yes.
the title of it? Okay.
Yes.
I do have it. We'll put a link in the show notes.
Okay. Yeah. Great. I mean, again, it wasn't a terribly informational video vis-a-vis like the structure of the game there, but I thought it was interesting to talk about the culture a little bit. I don't know much about the Japanese league culture or system or football culture really. I know their women's team was pretty competitive in the like aughts and early teens. And I think probably much for the same reason that America was so successful is that they, actually like provided platforms for women to compete at high levels in their own country. So I'm interested to hear especially about the development of the women's game there, because it seems like Japan is not the force on the world stage on the women's side that they once were, especially when they won the 2011 World Cup. So I'm curious to know how that has kind of shaped the professional game there.
Yeah, and we'll cover all of that. I have to say, researching this was one. I probably had three kind of big thoughts. One, it's the most fun I had researching any of the historical kind of stuff we've done, even our local San Diego stuff. It was really interesting to see, again, an FA who had strong vision and work to implement stuff and just set out about doing it. So it was exciting kind of to see how quickly things have changed in 35 years, right? To go from nothing in terms of professionalism all the way up to the robust pyramid structure that they have now. And in part of our conversation, we'll see things were changing in the last few years, just like we saw in England, things still changing in the last few years. So that was one thing. Two was probably frustration, thinking like this could have been the US with, a slightly different perspective on how to move forward. And we'll talk about some of those key things as we go through this, but it could have been us. So there was some frustration there, but then I think also some excitement that, we could still have a robust pyramid kind of thing like Japan has in 30 to 35 years. And we'll kind of look at how the men's pyramid developed, but then look at what's happening with the women's team. And because of their experience, what they did on the men's side, I don't know if necessarily the women's pyramid is developing faster, but it's at least on par and kind of at a similar rate. So I expect them to have a pretty developed football pyramid if we come back and check in a couple of, maybe even in a decade here. So let's go ahead and first look at, in 2025, on the men's side, what does the Japanese football pyramid look like? So as we mentioned before, it is 7+ tiers, and we'll we'll qualify that here in a second, of a pyramid tied together by promotion and relegation. There are considered three professional levels, all run by the J League. So, kind of like we see in England, where the EFL runs the Championship, League One, and League Two, the J League runs the top three divisions of football in Japan. And those are the only professional divisions. So you have the J1, which is made up of 20 teams, the J2, also 20 teams, and the J3, as of last year, up to 20 teams. So, and this 20 team balance just happened. Like we are in the first year of this 20 team balance all the way through. It's a typical promotion relegation where in the top division, 3 teams automatically relegated. From the second division, you get 2 automatically promoted. Teams 3 through 6 go into a playoff for that third promotion spot. And then at the bottom, 3 teams get relegated. So now in Division 3 or J3, you get the same thing. 2 get automatically promoted. You have a playoff for spots 3 through 6 to get the promotion. But at the bottom, you get 0 to 2 teams be relegated. And that's partly because of the structure, which we're going to talk about in more detail in a bit, that Japan has set up to make sure teams meet certain requirements. Think for us like the professional league standards, the PLS. So it's something similar. So you could get some teams relegated and then other teams below promoted, but they have to meet certain requirements to earn that promotion. So it's not set, that it's an automatic to relegated, or probably if we look back at this in a decade, it'll probably be more fleshed out. But that's where we sit right now for the top 3. Top 3 teams in J1, they automatic qualify for the Champions League. And I think one other one goes to a playoff, if I remember correctly. The average attendances right now, based on last year's season, ranged anywhere over those 20 teams from a low of 9,600 attending a match to 37,500. So 37,500 for the Euro Red Diamonds, which is the biggest drawing team in J1. Below those 3 is what's called the JFL. That's level 4. It is technically a semi-professional level, and I guess really technically, if you go back and look at how these leagues have been approved by the JFA, which is their footballing association, that it's technically the same as Tier 3 or the J3 league, but it works de facto like the 4th division. And the idea behind the JFL, which is Japanese Football League, is for these semi-professional teams to play in a national league and get experience, basically try to work on what they need to work on to be able to be fully professional and make that jump into Division 3 or a J3. Below that, so that's the 4th level. Levels 5 and 6 are the Japanese regional leagues. Now, depending on and this is where this pyramid structure is slightly different than what we see, say, in England, at least when we get to this level. But it's a regional structure. They run as either a Division 1 only, or in some areas with more teams, they run as a Division 1 and a Division 2 at this level. And that's why it's 5 and 6. So in some region, they might just have level 5, and in a different region, they have enough teams that they have a 5 and a 6. But from that regionalization, then it drops down into, well, actually, let me go back. For the regional leagues in total, there's 9 regions. If you look at all the D1 teams across all those 9 regions, there are 80 total teams, and there are 55 in Division 2. So again, that's technically tiers 5 and 6. Those leagues vary in sizes between a low of an 8-team league, again, depending on the region, or as high as a 20-team league in a more densely populated area. There is a tournament called the Japanese Regional Football Champions League, And that's what handles the promotion from the J or to the JFL. So from these regional leagues, the winners participate in a Champions League kind of format. It's not what we exactly think of Champions League, but they basically take these winners, put them into a new tournament, have them play off to see who might be able to earn a promotion into the JFL. And then below that is the prefectural leagues, and that would be considered level 7 plus. And however many leagues you have there depends on your region. So in one region that's not as populated, you could have what's considered a level 5 regional league, and then you jump immediately down to a level 7 prefectural league. So this is how they've kind of broken things up below the national semi-pro league, which is with the JFL. So, and the last thing for right now, where we are in 2025, this is going to be their last year in a spring fall schedule like we have with our leagues here in this country. In 2026, they've already decided they're switching their calendar to a fall spring schedule. So they'll use, the World Cup as a springboard to jump in and switch their calendars to go August through May with a winter break from December to February. So that's what's coming up in 26. So it'll be a 26-27 season once they kick back up in 2026. And then the last thing, kind of before this for where we are, in 2025, many people would, as far as team sports go, would rank association football or soccer the second most popular team sport behind baseball, which is far and above a dominant team sport in terms of popularity. So really kind of our question that we want to get into, and we'll take a break here for some of your input, Dylan, here in just a second. We want to see, how did Japan achieve this? How did they go from nothing in 1990 to all the stuff we just described in 35 years? So before we get there, I'll give you a chance to jump in.
Well, I think I'll start by saying what I think your average MLS fan might say in response to some of these arguments we're positing here is, and it's kind of the one that it's Old Faithful, we'll call it. Well, that's not America, and we're different here in America, which, like, what they're really trying to say is there are cultural differences in these countries that might kind of differentiate how they would develop these things. And I think I'm giving these people a little too much credit, but to a nuanced extent, there is some truth to that. Like, Japan has a much more collectivist national identity, so that that kind of lends itself towards things like 100-year plan for a J League, right? That would never happen in America because that's just not how we see ourselves culturally, for better or for worse. I would argue for worse, but that's another podcast. So there's some truth to that. I don't think that actually means as much as somebody who argues in favor of the status quo would have you believe, but there is truth to that statement. Whether or not it actually matters is another discussion, I would say. But so I acknowledge that. And I do think that Japan, like England, is much more, I will say, geographically set up for national, lower division type setup. It's, I think, about the size of California, if that, largely in a straight line.
2/3, I think, the size of California.
2/3 even, there you go.
Yeah.
And it's largely in a straight line. So obviously, and, early adopters of high-speed rail, and the geography is conducive for that. So it's not as big of a deal for a third division team to travel across the country as it might be in the United States. So there's that difference as well. But I think my response to all of that would be all it really takes is an FA that wants to do these things, sees the benefit in doing these things, and can see past next quarter's profit margins, right? And I think too that the problem with what has happened in American soccer development, and what I think the USL is getting right for the most part, is that U.S. soccer has largely tried to develop from the top down, and then once the top has started to develop, said, well, we can't possibly develop the lower parts. That doesn't pencil out financially, which is true. But you have to start from the bottom up if you want to build something like this, like Japan has. And I understand people would say, well, the J League 1 is what started first, but like that's really kind of beside the point. That's not really, I think that's kind of a oversimplification of what has happened. Yes, they've built leagues underneath it, but that's because they've built out the bigger and bigger base of clubs, right? Which the MLS actively seeks to stifle with their 500 million now. I don't even know what the next one will be, expansion fees.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I guess I'm trying to get ahead of what I think a lot of people would say in response to some of these things. But the truth is, it really just comes down to an FA that recognizes that an open pyramid actually in the long run is what's best for a country's football culture, both in terms of the league itself and the long-term sustainability and the roots it can get its tendrils into in, far-flung parts of the country, and also products for the national team. I know the Japanese men's side doesn't tend to make a huge dent at like the World Cup, but countries from Asia don't really. They are consistently one of the strongest nations in Asia on the men's side, and I think they're actually entering an era that will kind of see them dominate, because I think Korea is at kind of a generational changeover, and Japan has been pumping out excellent players. I mean, there are more than a handful of Japanese players in the Premier League, the Bundesliga, the Spanish League. It's more than it has ever been. So I think Japan has done a lot of things right. And again, it's because the FA gives a crap and sees the value in these things rather than just the pocketbooks of the owners. So kind of a roundabout way to get back to the point I always end up making. But, I can kind of foresee how these debates will go, I guess.
Right. So I'm going to comment on quite a few things, and then we'll get into this next segment. But your most recent thing about Japanese players, totally agree with you. That's a whole other podcast we could do about what they did intentionally at super young age to try to develop the next generation of players. So we'll have to save that particular one for another time. But I agree with your original premise also. There's going to be a lot of pushback. People say different cultures are different. The communities are different. But I am going to not push back on what you said so much, but on what other people might say or argue against, and say, at least through much of the 20th century, Japan and the US have a lot of parallels in their soccer development. We're going to go through some of those. But it really takes a turn in the 90s with the development of their league. And I think that directly ties into two comments that you made a little bit separately, but I'm going to tie them together. One is that collectivist mindset in Japan, like really everybody working together for the good of the whole, and moving things forward, as opposed to the US. It is part of our DNA as a country. It's not thinking 100 years down the road, how can I turn a buck next week, right? We have such a short-term fiscal vision that is ingrained in our culture in the US of how to flip something quickly to make money.
And if
I can to enrich yourself now.
If I could jump in and give an example I like to give to people in these conversations, that I think a lot of people think I'm being facetious when I first say this, but I cannot emphasize enough that it is literally the case that American corporations are legally bound to maximize quarterly profits for their shareholders. If there is a decision before them, one that is better for the long term but won't make as much money next quarter, and one that is worse for the long term, but will make more money next quarter, like, and they can do these calculations, they are legally obligated to choose that second option that will maximize profits next quarter. Not like they choose to do they are legally obligated to do these things. So it is written into American law that these corporations favor short-term gain over long-term stability. And so it really truly is an intrinsic part of our culture. I'm just trying to illustrate.
And that's only recently changed in the last decade or two as states are passing, benefit corporation type laws where you can have public benefit, even though you're not a nonprofit, but have public benefit be a primary focus of the business that you're trying to run. And, maybe for us in the US, that's a start of a change in mindset a little bit. But again, whole other non-soccer podcast.
Right. I'm not trying to get into the intricacies of corporate law, but just to kind of emphasize the point of how deep it is in our culture, like this individualistic mindset.
Right. Okay, so let's get back to looking at least some of the parallels right now in terms of sporting culture across Japan and the US. And then we're going to look at the history of how things developed in Japan and highlight some of the things that are eerily similar to things we see in the US. But before I move on, I made a note to myself and I forgot. I said Japan was about 2/3 the size of California. You're right. I was thinking of England back in our other thing because I did a quick double check. As soon as I said it, it sounded wrong. Japan and California are very close to the same size, with California being a little bigger. And as you said, Japan is stretched out a little more, and it kind of runs the equivalent of the length of our eastern seaboard from north to south.
Well, and is that including the archipelagos as well, like Okinawa, or is that just like a whole separate kind of, because that's so far flung? Do you know?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's mostly the things, but you kind of get the idea. I mean, for us, I think the biggest takeaway of all of this is that Japan does not have the geographical size that the U.S. does, which is always an argument that people bring up. And we're going to tackle geography in a different podcast of our Pro-Rel series. Right now, we'll look at, in this case, Japan and some of the similarities. So let's get into them, because Japan, especially post-World War II, heavily influenced by Western powers, specifically the U.S., really, if you're going to go to certain countries, I mean, Japan has a lot of things that feel very American. They have baseball as a huge sport. All right, we brought that over to them pre-World War II, but post-World War II, it really developed into one of their national pastimes, along with sumo. Those are probably their two dominant sports. But like the U.S., they love their big events, Olympics, Asian Games, those kinds of things. They love team sports, all kinds of different team sports out there. So you can, just like you can in this country, find lots of people watching lots of different types of sports. They love the individual sports, especially a lot of the combatives, boxing, judo, wrestling, and motorsports, motorcycle and car kinds of and boat motorsports. So there's a lot of parallels, same in this country, of sports that people like. And it's not just one or two sports that dominate the landscape. It is quite varied, and a lot of people like various sports. But soccer was not one of those big sports really pre-1990. Now it's considered probably the second most popular team sport. And that has been a generational shift because of what the FA has done. But I'll give you a chance to jump in quickly, but then we're going to dive into the historical path, especially through the 20th century, to see how soccer developed in Japan and how it's similar to a lot of the things that happened in the US until we get to the 1990s. And that'll be our last look on the men's side of really how the J League and the pyramid ultimately developed over the last 35 years. So,
it's not super relevant. You mentioned sumo, and I think that's a really interesting. I mean, this is not a sumo podcast, obviously, but I learned something recently about it that I thought was super interesting. And it kind of goes to the point of to show even how impressive it is that soccer has started to make its way in Japanese sports culture, in place of things like sumo in terms of like market share, if you will. I learned recently, and I didn't know this, that sumo like has pretty strong ties to the Shinto, like traditional Japanese religion, and is viewed as like partially like a religious practice as well as like an
Hmm.
individual like combat sport. And so for soccer to be taking, like, again, quote unquote, market share away from that is a pretty freaking big deal. But I think it also probably ties into larger, like you said, generational shifts away from certain more traditional aspects of culture in the West and in non-Western cultures. So anyway, that's not really super relevant, but I like I said, I learned that recently. I thought it was interesting, and it kind of helps to paint the picture, I think, of, like you said, the generational shift in society to what people are paying attention to.
Right. And that's interesting because I really know almost zero about sumo.
I don't know much, but
Other
every
than I
time,
could identify it if I saw a picture,
right.
like, yeah, that's sumo.
I don't know much either,
But
but every
beyond that,
time, every time I learn something new about sumo, it fascinates me. It is an incredibly interesting sport. So anyway,
yeah.
some other time maybe.
And I think in Japan, like most developed countries and like the US, most people are not fan of one sport or one, activity. They can be fans of multiple different things, but just that, as we said, soccer has grown in popularity. I saw one stat as I was doing the research, and I can't remember where it was exactly, and I think it was 40% of Japanese surveyed Japanese adults identify as a soccer fan. Like they have a team that they are a fan of. Now, I don't know if that was specifically teams in the J League or like we have in the US. My team may be somewhere else in the world, but 40% of their population identified as football fans. So,
Well, and I think too that one of the things, and shocking, this is a podcast in favor of a unified large pyramid, but I think one of the things that helps it to increase is that it is so much easier to convince somebody to support their local team than it is like this abstract concept of a league, right?
yes,
And so when you build out a pyramid, you're putting teams that have the opportunity to exist how they decide to in more and more communities, and you're creating more and more fans because, again, it's easier for people to give a crap when the team is like local, but I think more importantly, they feel it represents their community because
right.
people like to identify with communities, for better or for worse. It's a very natural human instinct. So I think building out that pyramid actually helps to create these generational shifts towards soccer fandom.
Now, I'm going to put a pin in that for a second
Yeah,
because
sorry, we're going way
no,
off.
that is an important thing that's going to come
Mhm.
up in a second here
Okay.
when we get to the establishment of the J League. But I do want to revisit that here in a few minutes. But for now, let's switch over to kind of the early-ish history of football in Japan. And in 1873, Archibald Lucius Douglas of the Royal Navy is credited with bringing the game of association football to Japan. So, very similar to around the entire world, a game invented in England, and you have English and Welsh and Irish and Scots all as people start to travel more and go around the world or leave where they were in search of work, better opportunities around the world, or their job just takes them around the world, they bring the game with them. So it's not surprising that someone from England, who was part of the Royal Navy during this time in Japan brings the game, to Japan. But 1873, not too different from when we started playing some of our first games of association football in the US around similar time period. It is believed that on Christmas Day in 1886, the Yokohama Country and Athletic Club formed the first association football team, in addition to the other sports and things that they were doing. And they also are believed to have participated in the very first official association football match, and that was in 1888. So in February of 1888. So really, even though 2 years apart in dates, really it's just more than a year because we're going December and then a year to the next February. So they were part of that first organized match in Japan. And again, 1888, very similar to things that were happening in the US around this time period of teams and games and new leagues starting. We were probably the US a little bit ahead in terms of organization of matches around this time. Then in 1917, we have what is believed to be the first club founded as an association football club, not as an athletic club or a cricket club or some other club that just happened to also play association football. So that seems to be the first time we have just a pure association football club founded. And, we had those before 1900 in the US, and then we had our big push again in the 20s with some of our attempts at professional leagues, but they were hyper regionalized because of our large country. Back in Japan in 1921, the JFA, the Japanese Football Association, was founded. It was founded as the Greater Japan Football Association because prior to World War I, Japan had control of a lot of different places like Korea, which changed post World War II. So it was at that point the Greater Japan Football Association. But it was 1921, the U.S. Soccer Federation, which was actually our second attempt at a federation in the U.S., that was formed in 1913, so only 8 years apart. In 1921, the Emperor's Cup was established. The Emperor's Cup is Japan's version of the Open Cup. So again, established about 8 years, 7 years actually, after. So at the time the FA was founded, they immediately start the Emperor's Cup. And the Emperor's Cup still runs today. It has had a few interruptions for various things that have happened in Japan's history, especially World War II. But it has, I think they're in their 104th, 105th version of the Emperor's Cup, but open to all teams. Now, all teams, all soccer teams. Now, we think of our Open Cup as open to all soccer teams, but in the Emperor's Cup, it's all teams. It's high school teams, it's university teams, it's all teams are open to it. So you have qualifying tournaments to get in. And I remember back, I don't know, mid 2000s, in the aughts. I remember it made the news. There was some, I want to say a high school team. I have to go back and look it up, but there was some young school kind of team that took I think at that time, one of their professional teams to penalty kicks. So
I think that may have happened again pretty recently. I feel like I remember hearing about that on the sweeper. I don't know. I might
have to look that up.
Totally misremembering,
but it's open to every team, right? So, but again, very similar to our Open Cup, established roughly the same time as our US Open Cup, has a long distinguished history of crowning the champion of all of soccer in Japan. In the 1920s, like we saw in the US, you start to see some more organized regional leagues, but especially for the schools, high schools and universities seem to be the place where this takes shape first. And that's the same thing we saw in the US. We start to see most of the leagues. There were some professional leagues that tried to start here and there, but really most of the leagues started with schools and universities that would adopt them. And that would also help, keep, for a lot of times, regional leagues going that were played by non-university adults. So we see a similar kind of thing in the 20s in Japan. In 1929, the JFA joins FIFA. Of course, we get an interruption, major interruption with World War II. But eventually, like a lot of world's football, it really starts to take shape and more people paying attention to international football from 1950 on, where, in 66, we get a World Cup that's televised live. But we're starting to have better communication and better travel and calmness a little bit with, post World War II. And we start to see some development of sport across the board, and we see the same thing in soccer. So just like we in the US started some professional leagues, probably our first big attempt at national professional leagues happened in the 60s with the NASL, at least for one that took off and stayed. Japan in 1965, the JFA organized the Japan Soccer League, the JSL. It was the first national football league in Japan. So, taking some of the best regional teams, putting them together into a national league. It was considered semi professional and not professional because it's really interesting the way, and this is very, to me, Japan, especially at this time period, they were all corporate teams. You had to be an employee of the corporation, and the corporation had to sponsor the team. So that's how they created these teams. Technically, you weren't paid to play soccer. You were paid to be an employee of whatever corporation it was, but then these corporations had teams, and now they had a national league to play in. So that Japan Soccer League, the JSL, starts in 1965, has a single division up through 1971 before we get some changes. But also in 65, there is this, well, it has been going on for a while. Sorry. They create this All Japan Senior Football Championship in 65. And that tournament is a separate tournament, an amateur tournament, as opposed to the Emperor's Cup, which is open to everyone. This is specifically created as like an entry tournament to help determine which teams will be, I'll say promoted, but we use that loosely, but allowed into the JSL. Really, I guess you have to think more in terms of expansion, as opposed to not, you're not buying your way in, but through merit, we're filling in teams really based on this tournament. Now, the Japan Senior Football Championship is still around, but nowadays it's really for their non-league teams. So it would be the equivalent of our amateur cup, right? Our national amateur cup is really the best correlation to this All Japan Senior Football Championship. That's kind of our first attempt at a national league. Again, right around the same period that we make a big attempt at a true continental league like the NASL. And then in 68, we have the Olympic Games in Mexico City, and Japan basically stuns the world taking the bronze, right? Which this Mexico City Games for Japan is a little bit like our 1950 World Cup win against England, right, or something like that, where it helps in this case for Japan really spark something because they're led by their player, their top scorer, Kamamoto. He scores 7 goals. He's the tournament's top scorer. They advance out of the group stage, which includes it's Spain, Brazil, and Nigeria. So Brazil and Nigeria don't get out of the group, just Spain and Japan. They beat France in the quarterfinals. They lose to Hungary in the semifinals. They actually get walloped in that one. But then they face Mexico for the bronze match in Mexico City for those games and beat Mexico to take the bronze medal. So that was a huge, like again, for a nation like the US, in Japan, watching a big sporting event and seeing their team take home a bronze medal, which I don't think anybody expected going into that tournament, was a huge boost for soccer moving forward. That was a very pivotal moment, even though we're still semi-professional stuff. So before we get for how that changes, I'm going to let you jump in if you have any questions or comments.
No, I mean, we're all pretty much into new territory for me, so I'm kind of learning as we're going.
Okay, so we'll keep going here. So that was 68. It takes till 72, but that sparked a new interest in soccer, and eventually the Japanese Soccer League creates a Division One and a Division Two. And this new Division Two starts with 10 teams. I don't have it in my notes, and I forgot off the top of my head how many teams were in Division One at this time. It might have also been 10. You will see a pattern. That's almost always what they start with within a league. So we now have a Division One and a Division Two, and now that tournament we just talked about, which I have to go back because I can't remember, the Japan Senior Football Championship. That one, which was kind of helping get people in as they create a new second division, that All Japan Senior Football Championship becomes the pathway into D2 now. So again, you're starting to backfill Division 2 with newer teams, but now you're establishing a promotion relegation between those two semi-pro divisions, which again are all corporate teams at this point. In 77, they created a new regional football league competition. So instead of having that open one of the adult teams that wanted to pursue to be professional or semi-professional, I guess, they took the winners of the regional leagues and put them together in a tournament to figure out who the best one was there. So already at this point, as opposed to the US, and this is where we start to make a divergence between what happens in the US and what happens in Japan. And Japan has always, like England, kept this idea of merit being very important. Who earned their way in there, not who paid their way in there. So kept this idea of merit. And then how do we figure out a pathway for anybody who thinks they might want to be there at the top? How do we make that pathway available to them? As opposed to us, with the NASL and pretty much every league that follows, actually going back to our early leagues, the ASL and so forth, it was owners and it was control and it was closed, and it wasn't really ever a thought about how someone else could work their way up into the same playing field as me, right? I'm here in the US to protect my space, but other countries, and this is a cultural difference as we talked about, looked at, how do we give people the opportunity in that pathway forward if they want to be there? So the thing is, as there's better competition, even though it's semi-pro, as we said, there are some decent players coming out of Japan. We had the player from the 68 Olympics that, was a top goal scorer. The only way Japanese players can pursue any kind of professionalism, if this be their careers, they have to leave the country because there's nothing available to them in Japan. I got to work for the corporation, and maybe the corporation gives me a cushy job and exclusive benefits and pays me a nice salary so I can play soccer. But you're still part of that. You're an employee of that corporation. You're not an actual professional soccer player. In 77, when they created this regional football league conference, they also did their first attempt at a Super Cup competition, like we see in several countries, where they took the Japanese soccer league winner and they would play against the Emperor's Cup winner and had that be like, I don't know if at this time they did it as the start of the season, but this was their first attempt at doing a Super Cup kind of thing. It only lasted about 7 or 8 years and never really caught on as its own independent competition with a trophy. Because we still have the Super Cup. We'll see how it gets revived here in a little bit when we get back to the J League. In 1985, Division II expands to 12 clubs, and then it expands to 16 in 86, and you split into East and West groupings. And then that kind of brings us right on the doorstep of starting the J League. And there's a couple of key events here that we'll get into in just a second of what kind of pushes this idea of professionalism and the J League to get started in the first place. But we'll pause there for a second before we go on, and Dylan, let you jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like I said, this is all kind of new for me. I'm trying to learn about some clubs while I'm listening to you. So I have found some interesting things, but nothing I'm really prepared to share yet. I'm sorry.
Okay. No, that's fine. All right. So let's our next phase here is going to be talking about it'll wrap up the men's side at least, and we'll get into the development of the J League and this football pyramid. Now, where we kind of left off there at 1986, right? The Division Two has expanded. It has East and West. Well, the U.S. has just been right around this time period awarded the I guess it was just afterwards. I'm trying to remember now, but awarded the '94 World Cup, right? It's I guess they hadn't been awarded yet, but it's coming up, right? This idea, and part of that conversation is the U.S. in order to get the World Cup needs to have a professional league, and this resonates in Japan, right? So they're like, if we ever want to host the World Cup, because we've hosted Olympics and we've done other things, we want to put on a big tournament like this. This is one of the things we like to do. If we're ever going to host a World Cup, our best bet to host a World Cup is to have a professional league. And in seeing how these conversations are playing out in the way that all right.
Oh,
Am I back now? Did I cut
yeah,
out there?
yeah. There you go. I wasn't sure if that was on my end or yours.
So I can. All right, I'm gonna ask that one more time because I don't know if I was cutting out again. Where was I when I cut out?
Pretty much at the beginning there.
What had I covered about the World Cup? Anything?
That the easiest way to get it was going to be establishing a pro league, and then I think that was like
right. So we'll just kind of pick up from there. So, in 1989, the JFA forms a committee to assess professional football. Like, what is it going to take? Like, how best to implement it? Like, we want to look at everything, and part of this is with an eye to hosting a World Cup, specifically looking ahead to the 2002 World Cup. So they spend, like, I don't know, a good year looking at what they're going to do. So that's 89. In 90, they actually set the requirements for what a team would need to do to be recognized as a professional team. And they end up getting 15 to 20 clubs apply from the Japan Soccer League. Now, that 15 to 20 is kind of, there's a little bit in there because it kind of depends what the requirements are ultimately going to be and what happens. So there's some conditional applications in there, but 15 to 20 clubs apply from the Japan Soccer League to be part of this new professional league. So in 92, the JSL has 28 clubs across Division 1 and Division 2. And some of these clubs are going to come in and form this new, what's going to be called the J League. So over 92, we get the J League formed. They actually kick off in 93, but we get professional soccer now for the first time in Japan. You get 9 teams get moved up from the JSL. You get 1 brand new team created out of scratch to give 10 new founding members to the J League. So for the JSL, the 18 that chose to stay non-professional for whatever reason, maybe they still wanted to go professional, but they were just weren't quite ready. They didn't get picked, whatever it was. Those 18 clubs stay And the JSL gets bumped down to become that Division 1 and Division 2 of the JSL now become the second and third tier of Japanese soccer, with the J League sitting at the top. So the J League, what we end up happening, we get a couple new teams added to the JSL, so we end up with 3 tiers, each with 10 teams. And the JSL rebrands as the Japanese Football League at the same juncture. So they rebrand as the JFL, just to kind of make that distinction, moving away from. But it's the same teams that were in the JSL. They're just the JFL now, so Japanese Football League. Also in '92, you get a new J League Cup that gets established. In its very first year, it was just used kind of as a warm-up competition before the first season kicked off. And then it went through various iterations of only being League One or J1, and once we eventually got J2, those teams were added, but then they were taken away and it was only J1 teams for a while. And now we're at a point in 2025 where all 3 of the J League divisions, J1, J2, and J3, all participate in the J League Cup. But that was established at the same time as the league. And this is, again, one of those things where Japan looked at what the rest of the world was doing and tried to mimic what everybody else was doing. Where in the US, when we established our league, we looked at what all the other American leagues were doing and tried to mimic those things rather than mimic what the rest of the world was doing. So 1993, as we said, J League kicks off its first season. It's the only professional league. It has those initial 10 teams. And then very quickly, those first few years, there's a little bit of a boom. By 94, we go up 2 teams. Now we're at 12. Because we're still pulling teams from the JFL, they decide not to keep a D1 and a D2, or the second and third tiers, and just consolidate it all into one second tier to be a little stronger. And then same year in 94, they bring back this idea of the Super Cup. So now it's the J League champion facing the Emperor's Cup champion, which they still have today. So we now have the Super Cup, again, looking at what the rest of the world was doing and trying to bring it into Japan. In 96, they had 2 more teams. They go up to 14. In 95, go up to 14. In 96, they go up to 16. In 97, they go up to 17 teams. In 98, the J League goes up to 18 teams. But then they hit a bit of a crossroads in 98. The first 3-ish years of the J League, huge success, huge crowds. The next 3 years of the J Leagues, like, crowds cut in half. And the J League, JFA, they realize that, like, we need to figure this out, and we need to get, like, we're going in the wrong direction here. So we need to have a better plan. So in 1998, they create what is called the 100-year plan. They want to have 100 sanctioned professional clubs by 2092, which would be the 100th anniversary of the J League. And one of the things, again, this is where I'm going to come back to what we put a pin in earlier, is they put the focus. So part of what they're doing is creating some standards. And in creating some of these standards and what you need to have to be a professional team, one of the key things they identified, and this is the part that really frustrates me in terms of the US stuff, but one of the absolute key things they identified is these professional teams, any professional team, needs to do a better job and have it be one of its most important functions is to connect on a grassroots level with their community. That was a huge thing they identified. If we're going to grow this and we're going to have this many professional teams in a pyramid, so again, compared to the US, which was protecting the ownership group that was already there and maybe allowing some people to buy their way in. Here you have a federation that's looking ahead 100 years, identifying how do we get to a robust soccer pyramid for our country, and to really push to implement that. So connect on a grassroots level with the community that that club represents. Now, there are a whole bunch of other things that are in there, and there's things about what you have to have in terms of ground requirements, stadium requirements, just like we have with the PLS. But that one really jumped out for me. For someone who's always harping about connecting with your community in this country with soccer teams, that one, obviously, with my own personal bias, jumped out quite a bit more than some of the others. So one of the things they decided to do in, like, how do we get to 100 teams? Well, one of the things we have to do is create more divisions, professional divisions. So in 99, they create a second division, and they rebrand the J League as J1 for the top division, J2 as the second division. They initiate promotion relegation of 2 teams between the 2 leagues. And then the JFL, which, was the JSL, then it got changed to the JFL, but it was still mostly those corporate teams. And they decide we got to get away from these corporations. We need to make these independent teams that really belong to the community as opposed to belong to a corporation. So they created a new JFL. They kept the name, but it was a whole new league structure that went away from that corporate idea of teams and allowed independent teams. And technically, you could have a university team enter the JFL at this point. You could have reserve teams. But the JFL kind of handled, all the pre-professional stuff, anybody who would like to go pro. And then that got bumped down because it was, right, the second tier. So the JFL gets bumped down now to the third tier. So when we make this shift in 1999, we actually drop 2 teams from J1. So they were at 18, so they dropped down to 16. We have 10 teams at J2, and we have 9 teams in the JFL. So that's 1999. We're talking 26 years ago, right? That's where we are. So, sorry, I was looking through my notes to make sure I have it. So we, again, have Pro-Rel between the first 2 divisions, but no relegations from the second tier. In this vision that they have of 100 years, if we're going to make more professional teams, we need to groom teams we need to give them a space to develop and become more professional. That's the JFL. And when they're ready, they can apply to be part of this second division league, the J2. So we didn't have any relegations that happen, only promotions, or I think maybe a better way to look at it is only expansion. Like, teams that met the criteria were able to petition to see if they could get in and be accepted, which, in a sense, is kind of where we are with maybe the USL and League One, right? We're looking ahead to promotion relegation, but we still have to buy our way in here in this country. There are still some differences, but this idea of, like, this becomes your place to move up and start at the professional level.
I was going to say, I think part of the reason I feel that the USL is on a good track is a lot of what you just described sounds a lot like what the USL is doing, or at least trying to do, with the focus on the grassroots and the local community, and the way they've developed League Two and pushed new clubs towards League One, sort of as, like you kind of described, almost incubators, kind of helping them establish themselves. So will the USSF get in the way? Maybe, but that's part of the reason I'm optimistic, cautiously so, about the USL is because a lot of what you just described about the J League in its early days sounds a lot like what the USL is trying to do.
And I wonder if they've looked at what they have done in Japan and used that a little bit as a model.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Because I agree with you. I see some parallels here. So to continue on, we get some slow and steady growth around the leagues. But in 2006, the the J League, right? So it's operating two divisions now, J1 and J2. The J League forms basically an expansion committee. They want to know how many clubs out there ever have an idea of going pro. It doesn't have to be next year or even in the next 10 years, but somewhere down the line, you want to be one of these 100 professional teams that are in this 100-year vision. So they pull all their teams down to the regional and prefecture teams, like all the way down to the lowest organized level, and say, is it on your radar to become a professional team? Which again, like blows my mind because like, maybe US soccer has done something like this and never, publicized it, but like here's and this actually wasn't the JFA. This was the J League itself saying, well, then how do we grow to this? But working in conjunction with the JFA, how do we do this? So they ended up from the survey of identifying, again, kind of depends how you look at it, but roughly 40 to 60 teams that expressed interest in professionalizing in some way. I mean, maybe they want to professionalize, but only be at, tier 3 or something, but not all the way at the top for whatever reason. But 40 to 60 teams they identify, which immediately starts giving them a roadmap for then how can we help move these teams into professionalism. So one of the things they did in 2006, which they had started before and dropped, but they reinstate what they call their associate membership system. So if you're in the professional leagues, you are a professional member. You are licensed. You have that, like you've met the PLS standards, which is what we would think of. But in this case, all these people could apply to be an associate member, and they get ranked and looked at whether they have already met the requirements to move up to, say, J2, which is now our lowest professional league in 2006, or possibly even J1. And maybe they're not even professional yet, but they've met the requirements, or they've met some of the requirements and not any. But there's a system in place to help you as a club identify what you need to do moving forward. The league, they have these applications, they review, they give you feedback on it. There's a system there kind of to, not do it for anybody, but help direct them on what you need to do to move forward. And the last thing in 2006, the league kind of faces a choice. Do we expand J2 up to whatever we think our maximum amount is going to be for that league? Or do we jump in right now and create a J3 and go with a third tier and kind of grow each of them independently from there? And what they opt to do is max out J2 first. So that's what they do. So between 2006 to 2000 and where is it? I'm missing my things. 2012, the J2 expands to 22 teams, right? So that's 6 years. It just takes them 6 years. They get to 22 teams, which is what they want for their second tier of professionalism. And then they almost immediately, but already there's talk once they hit that max of, okay, how do we go about implementing our third tier, which they do implement in 2014. So we're talking a decade ago. They implement their third tier in 2014, and that's kind of where we are a little bit, the system at the present. So you've got 3 tiers, J1, J2, and J3. J3 keeps expanding. They keep kind of tweaking promotion relegation a little bit. And get all the way till 2025, which is what we described at the beginning, where now J1 is 20 teams, 3 get relegated automatically. J2 is 20 teams, 3 get promoted, 3 get relegated with a playoff for that last spot in J2, just like we see in, say, the championship in England, right? And J3, same thing. you get 3 promotions, 2 of them are automatic, and then playoffs between positions 3 through 6 to figure out that last spot. And 0 to 2 teams relegated out of this third tier. So already Japan has this, they had this vision in 1999. How do we get to 100 teams by 2092? And we are now at 2025 and they have 60 of those teams, right? Because they created a roadmap for how to get there. And instead of controlling up at the top and protecting owners, they gave teams a pathway to do it themselves, working their way up, and let the teams fill out. And you had teams self-relegate. You had a variety of different promotion relegation systems. You had some playoffs where a team that might get promoted from like J3 has to do a playoff against one of the teams in J2, like we see in Germany. Right? So before they finally now in 2025 have settled on what would be a more English version of how they're handling their top 3 tiers. And as we said in the beginning, in 2026, they're moving to a fall-spring calendar with a December-February break. So they're using the World Cup to make that transition, like we heard MLS toy with. Haven't really heard anything about USL, what their plans are. I think they can move a little faster than MLS, but I mean, World Cup is coming up this summer, so doubt we see a big change in the USL for next season. Switching calendars, that would probably be too abrupt of a switch. Okay, so before we switch over to the women's side and see how that pyramid developed, I mean, here's where we are, 2025, with promotion relegation all the way down 7 tiers, because they were developing what was happening at the regional levels at the same time. We really only focused on the top 3 levels for our discussion, but the JFA was focusing on how to organize the regional levels and set up the structure to move, to connect everyone, not move people around, but to connect everyone in a promotion relegation system.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've kind of said a lot of what I would want to say, which is that I'm hopeful that the USL is taking cues from this experience, and I think that the J League history and development is a very good thing to look at when trying to understand why the world of US soccer doesn't need to be the way that MLS and MLS fans want it to be. They claim that this is the way it needs to be, but it doesn't. And the J League is a very good example of another way to build a successful football pyramid. So I understand that's why we're talking about it, but I think if you find yourself wanting to make that argument, this is a good place to start.
Right. I think the difference is, are you protecting the owners or are you protecting the game? Right. That's what it comes down to. And MLS is a great structure if you're protecting the owners, if you're giving them a safe place, because again, the way we look at things in this country, that's, it's the quick buck. It's to flip things around. So if you're going to protect owners, then yeah, MLS is probably the perfect system for that. But if you're looking to build, as I think our federation, our national federation should be doing, if you're looking to build a strong, robust soccer pyramid and soccer culture in this country, you have to look out for everyone from top to bottom, not just who's at the top. All right, so let's take a quick look at women's football in Japan. And in 1989, they get their first semi-pro league. It's called the L League. So actually, the L League was before the J League actually started, but they called it the L League. That was their women's league. It was semi-pro, same kind of format like the Japan Soccer League. And then in 2004, which I feel like something might be lost in cultural translation here, because in 2025 US culture, I don't know how this flies, so I do know how it flies, but in 2004, the league gets rebranded as the, if I'm pronouncing this correctly, the Nadeshiko League. The name was chosen by fans. It's named after a particular flower, and it signifies the ideal of a dutiful Japanese woman. And I read that and I was like, man, in 2025 USA, that doesn't fly. And I wonder if even as I read that and those words, something's lost maybe a little bit in the cultural translation there.
Yeah, I wonder, because that does seem a little like, ugh. But then again, I don't know, cultural differences, who knows?
Right. So 2004, when they did that rebranding, they also create a second division. As you alluded to in the beginning of this podcast, the women's team has been on a tear kind of from the mid-aughts through about the end of 2020. They are Asian Games champions in 2010, 2014, and 2018. They're World Cup champions in 2011. This helps also spur an interest on the women's side. They even, after that World Cup win in 2011, create a third division semi-pro league. So each of them had 10 teams. And the success of the women over time and what happened on the men's side and what was happening around the world in terms of professionalizing women's soccer spurred the JFA to invest in a professional league. So in 2020, they announced the WE League. I think the WE was short for Women's Empowerment, if I remember, which I found that to be an interesting contrast to the Nadeshiko name. But again, maybe something lost a little bit in translation with that. But they create the WE League, which now is a professional league sitting at the top. And you bumped down the Nadeshiko League, just like we did with the JSL before. And it starts handling that preparation to get people ready for the professional league at the top. And when they launched, the just like the USL and the Super League, the WE League launched as a fall spring league instead of a spring fall league like the men's side. So again, like the USL, and this is, as we've said, I feel like the USL has really looked at what's happened in Japan. And so their women's top league immediately switches to the more traditional European calendar. And in this 25-26 season that's going on, actually, I don't know if they've started up yet, but 25-26
I think they're
season
underway, because they're still going during the summer, right? So they're wrapping up their season. I know they're mid-season because Spurs signed a player directly from Japan, and he's coming in like mid-season.
Oh, on the men's side, they're men's season.
Oh, sorry,
that's
right.
Side.
That's right. Yeah. What?
So,
okay, yeah, sorry.
But right now, coming into the 25-26 season, whenever that officially starts, there's going to be 12 teams in each division. So they no longer have the third division of the Nadeshiko League, which they had briefly. So now that they started the professional division, they have the WE League at the top with 12 teams. They have the Nadeshiko League Division 1 at 12 teams and the Nadeshiko League Division 2 at 12 teams. But because they also learned from what they did on the men's side and organized what's happening below, they do have a 5+ tier pyramid set up on the women's side. Only one professional league at the top. They have 2 semi-professional divisions. Then you jump down to the regional leagues, just like we saw at the men's side. Same regions, same kind of things. So you have that base and you have that pathway of teams you have teams that now see a pathway that they have to move forward and professionalize because of the structure that they've set up in Japan. And which, again, amazed me in doing this research, how much both the professional league, as opposed to, let me back up. In Japan, you saw the professional league work together with the FA to create a system to help increase professionalization in the number of teams and the structure of the pyramid. Whereas and with their PLS type thing that they had were more a direction of how we could get more teams involved. Whereas what we saw historically when MLS started is working with US Soccer and creating the PLS, but it had a de facto effect of protecting MLS and really pushing other people away, right? And insulating. It was really preventing competition from MLS instead of organizing a soccer pyramid. And frankly, I think MLS and the owners are in a position now where, unless they're forced to, would never want to have any interest in being part of a bigger pyramid. That may change, but they have a cushy system set up for them that protects them as owners. So why would you want to change that?
The change will never come from them, which is part of the problem.
Yeah. Okay. So I had originally planned kind of another section to kind of talk about some of these, but we've gone a bit of time.
Yeah, we managed to turn this topicless podcast into a 90-minute podcast. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll save some of these things. I think next week we'll revisit just as a global overview, look at a couple of these things next week. Because I have some additional to what I already made in the podcast, some commentary about things that stood out, but I don't want to drag this particular podcast out any longer because as you said, we've gone quite long with it. So Dylan, I'm going to give you a chance to jump in with any final comments in terms of soccer in Japan, and then we'll wrap up our episode.
Well, like I said a couple times, this is mostly new information to me. My exposure to Japanese soccer has mostly been through either the players that have made their way to Europe on the men's side or the women's national team. So this is all pretty new to me. But I will say one of my big takeaways is I'm finding myself even more cautiously optimistic about the USL's path forward than I was coming in. So we'll see.
Yeah. All right. Well, other than that, any big soccer plans for the week?
No, international break. So I'll be doing a boycott, I guess, if you could call it, because I wasn't going to watch them anyway. But yeah, so no, that's pretty much it, I think.
Yeah, I don't know how much soccer I'm going to be able to get watching this week. I got to catch up from my unstructured week I just had.
Yeah, fair enough.
And get things caught up, and hopefully be a little more prepared for next week's podcast. Although I'm glad I was able to spend the time on this.
I was going to say we made it work. So
yeah. Okay, well, I guess for us, that wraps up another episode of the LGS Pod. If you have a question or comment about tonight's show, please drop us a note. You can do so by leaving a comment on our YouTube channel. You can send us a message on Blue Sky. We're at soccershorts@bigpinedigital.com. Or if you're listening on the podcast app, which I think most of our listeners are, you can send us a text using the Send Us a Text link at the top of the episode description. As always, we very much appreciate all your comments and your feedback. But as we always say, if you are able and the time works out for you, feel free to join us live as we do our broadcasts on YouTube. We usually go on Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Pacific time. All right, Dylan, any final comments before we actually close up this episode?
Nope. Stay cool. Stay hydrated.
Stay cool, especially if you're in San Diego. We've had some crazy heat so far. All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining us for another episode of Local Grassroots Stories. I'm John Cross. With me is Dylan, and we will see everyone, hopefully, or be here for you on audio format next week. Good night, everyone.